We've been putting our best and brightest to use in marketing to the American people, everything to nudge them and push them to spend money they don't have, to buy stuff they don't need. We have a long-standing, well-developed science of dividing people and playing to their fears. Why can we not have a science of communicating our most common concerns, our genuine grievances and verifiable truths to the masses, to the wide range of target audiences across our country's vast expanse of urban and rural terrain from 100, even 1,000 different directions? From the angry poor farmer relying on subsidies to survive against large agribusiness, to the Section 8 resident in the black community, to the working professional who gets half her paycheck confiscated while trying to raise a family. The status quo, if we may use that term, is not any one person, a puppet master, a string puller, or an organization. It's not spooky, it's not a shadow government, but it is very real. It can be said to be the overall state of our media and its public messaging when it comes to politics, to profiteering off fear, resentment, to sensationalism, to balkanizing, dividing, conquering, campaigns, pundits, radical subcultures, talking heads, binary thinking, left versus right, poor whites versus poor blacks, welfare queens versus racist rednecks. All these are visceral stereotypes designed to enshrine a kind of conversation that keeps the most important aspects of our system and our society and how to talk about it in the hands of the most extreme on both sides and the most unreasonable on both sides. If we want to call this the government media complex, loosely speaking, we can. The point to see here, hopefully with the clarity of a sniper rifle, is that the system in place has been dividing us and playing off our emotions in a very insidious and deliberate way. And there is a science behind this. I am well trained in this science. I was in psychological operations, speak Arabic and other languages, and have a good understanding of how we employed this in Iraq as well as Afghanistan. I did not use it against Americans, and if I did, I would be sitting in a dark prison cell somewhere in solitary confinement or isolation. It's unconstitutional to psyop the American people, and I don't, and I have not. However, I understand how propaganda works. The left and the right, to me, it is almost indistinguishable in its core truth of how it works. They have different styles of playing to different parts of the brain. Liberals and conservatives sometimes have different brain wiring, and there are different ways to play to this. It's all propaganda. The status quo has been using this divisive science of fear, resentment, and sensationalism in ways which keep us relying on illogical but emotionally satisfying extremes, ceding to our lesser natures as we revert to very simplified ways of thinking about ourselves, about our fellow Americans, about our government, and about complicated issues. And it feeds off legitimate grievances, it plays on our primal natures and ancestral brain circuitry, down to our limbic fear pathways and our tribalism and our debasing stereotypes. Nowhere has this been more shamefully and tragically played out in the last half-century than among our working poor, both blacks and whites alike. These two subsets of national anger and resentment have been played against each other, using old, almost ancient methods of divide, manipulate, and conquer. This dates back to pre-capitalist serfdom. It's not new. The terms like Nixon, Southern strategy, welfare queen, Lee Atwater, and psychologically permeable phrase, those people, quote unquote, will be familiar to many who lived through the 70s and 80s, and this should invoke horribly infuriating images and anger among liberals and conservatives, among blacks and whites, among poor, middle class, and even among rich. Most of us, regardless of your income or your race, are getting screwed by the status quo from both sides. And I argue that they should be this type of fear-based politics, these appeals to fear and resentment, and the idea of those people is a stereotype enshrined in how people talk about each other. This works especially on the poor and working class. And I argue that this should be communicated to all Americans and made accessible and understandable to anyone who wants to understand how people are being manipulated and screwed by the Democrats and Republican elites alike. The status quo has been tapping into our resentment. I say work with Americans across all categories from coast to coast, as well as veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, and people trained in understanding propaganda, both in social science as well as in psychological operations, and people from Madison Avenue, people from Wall Street, people who understand, who've worked in advertising. We all have the same science. Let's use the science to unify the country along a narrative that speaks the language of everybody and fights back.